This media is brought to you by Polyscope.
In the realm of tomorrow, where tech meets mind, we ponder, we dream.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other nowadays over Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, Mike Pastel is my name. I've been in the industry of technology, people with disabilities for, I hate to say it, 40 years now, since the mid 80s. Literally.
Wow.
Yeah. And started out with, documentation, making documentation, electronic documentation back in the early days of electronic documents usable and accessible to the blind, and have moved my way off through software into the web. And now we're working on AI and automation and integrating that into this ecosphere of accessibility and disabilities.
Very cool. So what made you decide to go into this space?
The space I'm in right now,
Yeah.
or just disabilities in general. I mean,
Just
for me, it was a profession. I just kind of lucked myself into it. It's
Mhm.
one of those typical things. Working for a tech company back in the mid '80s, a boss came up to me and said, "Hey, could you handle this project for me?" It involved, the National Braille Press out of Boston, and all we had to do was just bring our documentation to them, and then they would produce it in Braille.
Mhm.
At that time, markup languages were just Goldfarb had just come out with its first versions of SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language. So we were playing with it, putting it out to various printers, and I thought, hey, if we can make something usable and accessible to various printer types, why not try to do it to a Braille printer? So
Mhm.
that led me off into a whole new career. As it turned out, there are a lot of other folks that were very interested in doing that, and here I am, 40 years later, and now we're talking about, of virtual reality, augmentative reality, 3D Braille, tactile Braille, and AI integrated into the space. So it's, as you can see, just from the tone of my voice, it's something I'm very passionate about.
Wow. So that's you're actually around my vintage because I remember that too. I remember the original days of HTML, web, and all that stuff, and how
Sure.
HTML was just sort of like a subset of HTML. And I'm like, it's amazing that it's still around, right? I mean, 40 years later, it's still sort of like the basis of almost everything.
Yeah, well,
Isn't that
when
crazy?
will ChatGPT eventually replace the notion, of no code, right? We already talked about no code environments, so eventually that'll probably catch up and happen. But I think that's where the big test is, frankly speaking. I think that, in fact, is really the challenge to mainstream technology, where AI and emerging technology is concerned. Because how do you resolve something in an age where personalization is really the big equalizer, I think, now
Hmm.
across the board? How do you do that for people with disabilities? And it would be one thing if it were just the blind, but it's not. We're talking about the deaf, we're talking about the blind, we're talking about individuals with, intellectual disabilities, individuals with physical disabilities. So it's a big world out there, and the challenges are all over the place.
Yeah, that's crazy. So how do you actually do that though? Like how does the software work? How does it customize itself to those levels of access?
Well, that's the point. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't today. I mean, we're still living, 40 years later, I'm still living in a world where individuals with disabilities need assistive technologies, right?
Yeah.
They need screen readers, screen magnifiers, specialized keyboards, or input devices. I mean, they're still attached with keyboard, for crying out loud, while the
Hmm.
rest of us are talking to our systems for all intents and purposes. So
Right.
I really believe, Ram Charan, I don't know if you know him, he's a well-versed writer, worked with Jack Welch for many years, and kind of a futurist himself. But he really believes that we have entered that age of personalization,
Mm.
where every user will be able to have an interface, and all interfaces will adapt to the user, and have it customized as a result. But we're not there yet. When will we be there? That's my goal. That's ultimately our goal.
Right. So it'll be customized for not for interfaces, it'll just be customized for content, right? Like it'll be super customized on the content side of things. So I could see a point where you're going to be listening to music that's basically written for you, right?
Right.
So like each individual person. So it's almost like I can't listen to music with in a group of people because this music is specific to me, right? We're going to get to interfaces that are just that specific down to that level.
I believe so. Yeah. I
Mm.
mean, it's a good debate about whether is it just content or is it content in interface, because
Mm.
the reality is in it's funny because I wrote this in my book that's already almost 25 years ago. My
Wow.
concern back then wasn't for the blind and those with visual disabilities, because we're already making great progress on the web, what we're doing through the Web Accessibility Initiative and things along those lines. My real concern actually became voice interfaces. Back then,
Mm.
I was
Mm.
already concerned, and I still am, because, when was the last time you had a voice interface that really truly recognized your voice and then delivered something that was, the content itself at that level was actually 100%, perfect and clear?
Never.
No, right? And yet I worked with,
Not
I
for
was
lack of trying, mind you. Not for lack of try. I've tried. I believe me, I've
exactly.
tried.
Hey, listen, my first project after that Braille project was working with a little company I think they were in Newton, Massachusetts, called Dragon Systems, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
and they were working with Digital Equipment Corporation, who had the Deck Talk. So we had guys like Tony Vitality who were already then working on voice interfaces, voice IO. And again, here we are. That's 30 years ago,
Hmm.
and we're still not there yet. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of challenges and a lot of excitement around what we can do at that level.
It's way better though. I mean, if you talk about like Dragon Dictate, I used Dragon Dictate ages ago, and every time I used it, I ended up having to rewrite the whole damn thing over again anyway.
Yeah,
So it didn't save me any time. But
yeah,
then recently, now these podcasts, I use something called TurboScribe to
I've heard of
convert
it.
them to
Yeah,
text, and they are almost perfect.
yeah.
So like as soon as you start applying AI to it, it seems it really like leapt up orders of magnitude in quality.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing numbers around 98, 90, even 90, approaching 99% accuracy. But in reality, when you see that in bulk, it's not, it just it just doesn't work as well.
Ah.
Education is experiencing this, media is experiencing this, when you're trying to do, for example, real-time captioning, which is
Mhm.
a big issue, right?
Yeah,
So it's definitely got better. It's much better than it was back in the 80s and the 90s, but we still have a way to go.
yeah, yeah, and it's become so accessible now. I mean, it's almost free.
Yeah,
It's
almost
gotten to the
anyone
point
can
where it's
do it.
close to free. Yeah.
That is very true. Anyone can do it. I mean, I could hire Rev to do it if I wanted them. I could call up some folks and friends I know at the National Center for Accessible Media down in Boston, over in Boston. But the reality is you're right. The tools are getting better. The Googles, the Microsofts, the Apples of the world, the OS people of the world that are developing those interfaces are getting much better at it. So we've got a good positive future, but we're just not there yet.
Right. So where you are now, are you the founder or one of the founders?
No, I know. I'm the Chief Accessibility Officer for AudioEye now. I
Hmm.
have been through my startup phase. I've done 3 or 4 companies, sold them all. I still have one that I still am hanging on to. That, by the way, integrates AI into it. It's kind of a news service just around technology and people with disabilities. But I work with AudioEye. I've been here not quite a year, about 9 to 10 months now, as Chief Accessibility Officer, helping our company now to deploy basically automated remediation. That's really
Mm.
where our sweet spot is. We combine that with human assisted remediation as well, because we're not anywhere close to being 100% accuracy level, but we're moving forward. And AI is helping a lot there.
Right. And so tell me a little bit about your startups that you're working with. Like what made you decide to do the startups?
Well,
Were you just
what
like,
really, yeah, no, it's a great question, and not one that people ask me. What really got me started was I basically hit a stopgap at I was at Digital Equipment Corporation. I don't know if you remember DEC.
I totally remember
Right?
Dak. I remember
Yeah, yeah.
visiting them in somewhere in Massachusetts. I forget exactly where their
Maynard,
big offices
probably
are.
Maynard's, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Maynard
yeah.
the headquarters. I was up at software engineering in Nashua, New Hampshire. Um, and so I had developed, along with a couple of other friends, basically a disability accessibility technology program office. Did a lot of work there. While I was there, I developed the very first accessible CD-ROM, fully accessible to the blind and visually.
Whoa,
That became
fantastic.
a product. That became a product that DEC put out until it started to outsell DEC's own reader. And so they said, okay, this is not a good
We
idea.
can't have that happening.
Putting out of business. So sorry, you can only sell this to blind people. We need to see a doctor's note for them to do it. So I essentially hit this wall and I just couldn't go any further. We were working very closely with MIT. By that time, Tim Berners-Lee had moved to MIT. The World Wide Web Consortium was there. I was working with folks like Goldfarb and Berners-Lee and Jim Miller, Daniel Dunn, a lot of the folks that were there on a volunteer
It's
basis.
like the founding fathers of everything, of the web,
Yeah,
right?
It's amazing. And when you start to look at that timeline, the folks that I've had relationships with over the years is just, Vint Cerf on top of it.
Wow.
It's really, it's a privilege. It really is. And I never would have guessed it back then. But anyway, I decided to leave DEC because I couldn't go anywhere. And so that ultimately led me first to creating the Web Accessibility Initiative at the W3C. So we launched that in 97. And shortly after that, I said, from here, I'm just going to go into professional services and start offering consulting. That led me to building a company called WebAble, which eventually became TPG, which is the Paciello Group. And TPG became basically a professional services consultancy of some of the best people in the world, literally all over the world. And then we were acquired in 2017 by Vispero. And I went and launched another company called Open Access Technologies, which built accessible documentation across the board, all kinds of documentation. Sold that to Crawford Technologies. And I still have WebAble, and it's this new service like I have. So I'm looking at how to pilot that, get that thing going in the year. But full time, I'm here at AudioEye, and I love it. It's this great company. A lot of folks here themselves with disabilities, but everyone dedicated to the same thing, and that is making the web usable, accessible, and equitable. That's the new word that we've included as part of our tagline now.
That's interesting. So how does equitable fit in? So I kind of somewhat understand accessibility, but how does equitable fit into that?
Okay,
Like,
so
what would you describe as equitable?
Equitable now is the result of AI. Artificial intelligence, because AI basically uses data to come out with what statistical average, right? It says the statistical average means that everything can work well at this level. So if I'm a recruiter, I'm looking for these kind of specialties and these kind of qualifications. I go out, I put it in AI, and it goes out and it says, here are the people that meet that statistical average, right?
Right.
Here's the problem with that. People with disabilities don't live within the norm. Right? They don't live within the statistical average. They live on the outside edges. That's why personalization and customization are so important to our interfaces. And so we've and I can't take any credit for this. This is really, I call the brainchild of Dr. Jutta Trevianis up at OCAD in Toronto. And she started really focusing on this notion of bias in AI, and then bringing in the word of notion of equitability. So it's just another way of saying you can't create an application or an interface or whatever you're building without including people or considering people with disabilities in that data.
Right. But how do you do that? Because there's so many ranges of disabilities.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you hit the sweet? I guess you have to hit some kind of sweet spot that works for most, or can you really customize it to everyone?
Well, I do believe you can customize it for everyone. And like I said, ultimately, isn't that our goal? Ultimately, I don't want to have to log into something and then set all these preferences, just so I can use it, whether it's colors or it's font size or what have you, right? Voice, not voice, keyboard, not keyboard, whatever it is. I don't want to have to I would like to be able to do the old HAL notion. Let me just talk and it does it for me.
Right.
But that should be true for everyone.
Yeah.
And of course, if you have any kind of if you're nonverbal, right? A person with CP, maybe not necessarily nonverbal, but they've got voice utterances that may not be easily distinguishable. It still requires some tuning. So I believe that there'll always be this notion of personalization that requires fine tuning. And look, if AI is built around statistical data, right? and the analysis of that data, then we're just pushing data into it. So
Yeah.
you include the data around whatever that interface needs to do in order to be personalized for the user who's interacting with it. I
Right,
don't think
right. So
that's the
it kind of
hardest
reminds me of
thing.
old the old Dragon Dictate training
Yeah,
like you had to train it
that's
for it to
exactly
get
right.
to get to be point where it was even marginally useful. I mean, it works the same with with AI, right? You can converse with it, or you
Exactly.
communicate with it in some way, and then it trains itself based on the way you communicate. I mean, that's the best way to do it.
I don't know any other, I still don't know any voice interfaces that don't require initial training.
Mm,
They still do. They, usually they have you run through various sentences that capture intonation, your dictation, your, if you come from a different a dialect, all
yep,
of that has to be captured
yep.
within the range of voice interfaces. So yeah, we're still there. We're still training. That's okay. It's cool.
Well, how does the AI work? Does the AI do it? Like, because I can feed all sorts of stuff to it, and it's able to figure it out. I mean, does it have all those dialects already preloaded, or I mean, how would it
Well,
know?
yeah, I can't say enough about what kind of work goes into that because most of that work is still in the labs,
Mm,
right? Google's still doing it, Microsoft's still doing it, Apple's still working with it. All of these companies that are working with that. I can't tell you exactly what they're pumping into it. I could give you some leads into people you should talk to who probably have a better idea about how that goes about and how they're working it. But I still think that that is a work in progress because, again, I still haven't seen anything out there that makes me say, this is where we want to go. This is how it has to be done.
right, right. So it really does require that the communication to occur, right? There's no way
Right.
to sort of go in cold and say, well, this is how we'll be able to communicate to this guy, even if there's no data in the background.
Unless you work for the government, the National Security Agency, the CIA, or something like that, because I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. About several years ago, I was up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, at a conference, a fast forward conference that they put up there, and it was really interesting. A product VP for EMC, if you
Hmm.
remember EMC
Hmm. Hmm.
Corporation, gave a demonstration of a product that they were testing, and it was being done under NSA funding. And the goal of it was to do voice recognition at levels and quality that had never been done before.
Mm.
Long story short, they had gotten it to basically 99%. It was pretty amazing what they were able to do.
Wow.
And
And
of
when
course,
was this?
this
When was this?
was maybe early 2000s,
Wow.
2004, somewhere in that area. I
Wow.
remember the first time I went and saw it. It might have been a little bit later than that, but it was around that area. I already had TPG up and running. That was in 2001. So I'm going to say 2003, 2004, somewhere in that time frame. Two ironies about that, though. Well, one is that they were using it to spy on everybody else, right? So they could pick up
Of
voices and
course.
repeat them back and write it out to text. Okay, so you get that. Cool. The other interesting thing is the guy who is now the chief technology officer at EMC used to work with me at DEC.
Hmm.
So when I stood up and he looked at me, he said, "I know you." And I said, "Yeah, it's Mike Paciello." He says, "Okay, here it goes, folks. It's going to be a disability question because I know Mike. That's what it was." And sure enough, I said, "Look, if you've got this kind of quality in your software and that voice recognition, why can we not integrate that into media, do that kind of recognition and spit it out to captioning?"
Exactly.
And he said, "We never thought about that." And
Hmm.
I don't know if they ever did, but that's where
Wow.
we're at today, right?
So
So,
if that was
back.
20 years ago,
Yeah.
can you imagine where we are today?
Yeah, of course. That's it. Exactly. So we are better, but we're still not great. To use a Collins expression, we're good, but we're not great.
Fantastic. So where do you see things going from here? I mean, do you like so tell me a little bit more about AudioEye specifically and what they do.
Yeah. Okay. So AudioEye got into the business of remediating websites and in helping clients who have platforms, host companies that are out there building websites. But those websites are not usable or accessible to
Hmm.
people with disabilities.
Yep.
And by and large, most companies, small and large, just don't have the in-house expertise to go out and do that, nor do they have the time. And
Yep.
frankly speaking, more often than not, it's not their priorities.
Hmm.
So AudioEye got into this business. It's been around for quite a long time. Um, back when I started, was one of the very first companies ever to come out with it, was to start helping companies remediate their and enhance or design and develop out of the box their software, whether it was on the web or being shipped with, with an OS, what have you, or it was an app, right? Companies still need that help today, and that's where AudioEye, that's where their sweet spot is. Over the last 5 or 6 years, though, AudioEye, as well as a few other companies, have decided to integrate AI through the notion of what they used to call, or what some still do, an overlay technology or an overlay strategy. Essentially, an overlay is, and if you maybe seen them on websites, they usually come up with a little icon up there, and you click on the icon, brings up a palette, and you can turn on various aspects, or turn on different colors.
I've seen that
right?
here and there, sort of like this little icon in the corner that allows you
Yeah,
to change
exactly.
various.
Exactly. And so the thinking of those companies, these overlay companies, was, hey, this is a great way of helping people with disabilities, and companies address the disability market, frankly speaking, quick and dirty. Okay.
Right.
See a palette, click on a button, boom, your text is increased. Boom,
Yeah.
the contrast of your screen. The problem with that thought process, and this is why I was recruited in, is people with disabilities already have those technologies. That's what assistive technologies already do. So what good are they? In fact, they're worse, because the JavaScript that they use doesn't work as well. It doesn't give them the kind of high contrast font clarity in other aspects of it that the assistive technologies of a person with a disability actually have.
Right.
So AudioEye now is moving away from that complete ideology. And if I have my way, they'll be done with it by the end of this year. We'll be completely done with it. It'll be gone. Where we are, though, is we're focusing on scale and remediation, because that's a big problem. Right now, the most recent surveys done by WebAIM, which is based out of the University of Idaho. That doesn't sound right, but I think it is, up at the University of Idaho. WebAIM, they've done a yearly survey, an analysis of the accessibility of home pages of websites. And they've been doing a survey for 7 or 8 years now. And we're still at about 96% of them are not accessible or usable.
Not.
Not
Wow.
usable. And that's just the homepage, right? That's the simplest in terms of design and implementation and features and functionality. That's usually the simplest entry point. So who knows how bad that ratio is going to get if you go
Right.
deeper into the domain, right? Still, scale is everything. And they're building on the average, 250,000 websites are being built a day, right? Between new domains, subdomains, what have you, applications and everything else. Never mind the mobile platforms. So how do we keep up with it? We can't just do it manually, which is how I grew up, right? All of the great people in the world, all of my colleagues in the world who are really, truly experts at this, we've all been doing it in a manual way. Go in, look at the code, make the changes at the code level, at the source level, and then try to get the companies to get their engineers and developers to create a roadmap so that they're doing it, right?
Right.
Companies aren't doing it. They're just not doing it. And we can't keep up with these websites that are being developed every day.
Yeah.
So the only way to scale is through automation. And with the inclusion of AI, that makes it that much easier to do. So that's where we're headed. We can scale. Audio has some 120,000 plus clients right now, where we integrate our automated remediation software, and we go in. Now, quality is still an issue there, right? Is still a concern. So today we're roughly getting 30 to 35% of those errors that are built into a website that are being developed through automation. And we're working on improving that as we go. But it still requires two things. One is our devs, our engineers, our experts on the team who will go in and do that human-assisted enhancement to the code base, and then help the developers to learn it. We even create tools. We have an SDK for the developers that'll go in, and as they're writing code in real time, it'll tell them what they need to do from an accessibility standpoint.
Nice.
But more importantly, we have our own team of employees with disabilities. So we have blind individuals, we have deaf individuals, we have individuals with other disabilities who use the ATs and who then go out and then test our client sites to again ensure accessibility and usability.
Very
That's
cool.
the
Very cool.
company's business. Yeah, we do this on an international basis.
So so I'm almost thinking that, but these websites that you're talking about being built, are they not built on platforms that can support these types of different modalities?
Well, yeah,
Like I'm just thinking, like for the small sites, WordPress, right? I mean, doesn't
yeah,
WordPress as a CRM, that's not the word I'm looking for, as a, you know what I'm talking about, right? As
yeah, yeah.
like, doesn't it have like the layers to be able to support that level of accessibility?
It does and it doesn't. I mean, if they
Hmm.
don't code it in there now, I know WordPress. I know a couple of the devs, the accessibility devs that are working on it to create basically that platform that distributes accessible. And you can
Yeah,
choose. You can choose from their templates.
yeah,
There are a lot of companies that won't even do that, right? They won't
right,
integrate it automatically. And WordPress only does so many things that they actually integrate that you get
sure,
out of the box. Customization for accessibility. But yeah, you can do it at the platform level, but most of the large platforms and most of the large hosts don't do it. And so
yeah,
you get a company like an AudioEye that comes along and say, "Hey, look, we can solve this problem. Install just write an API that works between our platform and your platform, and we'll write it and we'll do all that coding for you. You don't need to think about it." That's our business, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's the old 80-20 mentality, right? Here's what I do as a host. This is my platform, right? You get a Civic Plus, a Final Site, a Big Daddy, one of those big WordPress,
hmm,
and they know what they do. They know who they serve. They know what they're great at. What they're usually not good at is accessibility for people with
right,
disabilities. It just doesn't represent a big, frankly speaking, revenue opportunity for them at their level, what they're selling. So they
right,
hire you. So you do your 80 and you outsource your 20. And
yeah,
so companies like AudioEye become the 20%.
absolutely. So it's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2034, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Where will you be? Where will this all be in 10 years?
Yeah. Well, so I really do again believe in Ram Charan's vision of personalization. So I
Hmm.
believe, and again, I wrote about this, I hate to tell you, 25 years ago, but I used to talk
Everything takes
about.
longer than you think. You know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Back then, I thought we're going to get this. We're going to get this done in the next within the next 10 years. So I talk about pervasive accessibility, ubiquitous accessibility, but ultimately, it's what Sharon is talking about. It is a user interface. It is a software, and I'm really just strictly talking about that world technology that adapts to the user
Hmm.
rather than me having to adapt to it. I don't need to
Right.
plug in a device or use a specialized application for it to recognize I'm blind, so I need tactile braille, right? And it gives me a tactile braille, or better yet, because of tactile braille devices, it just outputs it in tactile braille for me.
Yeah.
If I need it in voice ready, it gives it to me in voice.
Yeah. It almost leads me to think about personal AIs that actually create that interface between you and the rest of the world,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
there's a personal AI that sits between me and the world, and
Yep.
it will do all the translations for me.
I'll send
So,
I'll send you the chapter of my book. That's exactly what I talk about. Personalized
so you wrote about
framework
this
that does
40
all
years
this.
ago, and where is it?
Yeah, and it's still not there, right? No one's listening, right? No one wants to don't listen, but
No,
but
I think
uh
people are listening. It's just that, and this is the other thing I always like to say is that everything will happen. The only question is when, right?
yeah,
And
right.
in our society, it will happen when, I mean, we're in a capitalist society, so it'll
Yep,
happen when there's some money behind it.
yeah,
When if you can make money on it, then it'll happen. So, I mean, if we can have personal AIs that people can make money off of, and at the same time be that interface to us and customize it to our level of whatever, then and there's money behind it, then it'll start happening.
yeah,
But until
yeah.
then,
Yeah, there are a couple out there. There are a couple of products that are out there. Be My Eyes, or Be My AI is being funded by some venture capital and Microsoft.
oh,
So
nice.
I think Apple is. I think I read recently that Apple also is investing in them too. So there are AI technologies for people with disabilities that people are investing in. So you're right. I totally agree to it. But whether we get to this ubiquitous, totally personalized, self-adapting interface. In my time at 66, I'm hoping. I'm hoping.
It'll definitely happen within the next within the things are accelerating. Things are,
Hey, listen,
and I think it has to be part of a personal AI that'll do everything for you,
yeah,
right? Because
Yeah.
if it's just this like one piece of it, then the money's not in there. But if it's a personal AI that does everything for you and it has the ancillary benefit of customizing this thing perfectly to your accessibility requirements, then boom, it's there.
yeah. And here's the beauty of that. Those kind of customizations and personalized interface don't just have to be for people with disabilities.
Exactly.
They work for everybody, under every situation, right? Anytime, everywhere, any place, that kind of notion. And so that makes it even more ideal in terms of a personalized interface.
Yeah, because you were talking about increasing the font sizes, which I've had to do recently
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like,
It
okay,
happens.
is this like? So I'm like, oh, I'm spending a lot more time in the accessibility settings than I thought I was going to.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
happens to everybody.
Yeah. And ironically, that's where those overlays that you see out there,
Yeah,
you're the demographic that they work for, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot of people out there that are older. So you've got the whole elderly generation, and there are a lot of not what I call novice users, right? So they don't know how to set personalization at on their laptops or in their browser. They don't even realize that these things exist. So you give them a simple push button interface. Then here, make my text, from 12 point to a 14 point, so I can see it better.
yeah,
They can do that. So there is a market for that kind of thing. It's just not the disability market.
yeah, yeah. But everything's starting to merge together.
Yeah,
So we'll see it everywhere. This has
exactly.
been great. Thank you. This has been great. Thank you so much. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Best way to do is send me email. It's michael.pasiello@audioeye.com. Frankly speaking, if you just look me up in Google, you'll find me.
And you're on LinkedIn, I'm assuming. I'll put
I
your
am on
LinkedIn address.
LinkedIn. I'm LinkedIn, Twitter, X, call it whatever you want, and Facebook.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Nice being with you.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Yep, bye-bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.